I'm Matt Wizinsky. I wrote this book called Design After Capitalism. I wrote it a few years ago, and academic publishing moves kind of slowly. Probably all publishing moves kind of slowly, so it came out earlier this year. So many things have happened in my life and in the world in the last 2 years, so it's been really an interesting, I guess, perspective to hang on to as things have been shifting. But I think, if anything, the last couple of years, I feel more committed to some of the ideas put forth in the book, and maybe more certain that the opportunities are ripe in the moment that we live in right now. So I've been talking about the book in a lot of different contexts, and today's, I think I'm really excited to talk about it in the context of practice in particular. And so I will do an exceedingly brief overview of the book so that we can jump into putting some of the ideas in the book into practice, and hopefully actually using them in this very brief workshop to get started on thinking about how, in whatever it is that you might do, that you might make use of some of the ideas, particularly near the end of the book when I get into translating some of the theory stuff into actionable guidelines. So Christian has shared the Miro link there. I'm going to screen share and just take a look at that Miro board, because before we jump in, I just wanted to make sure everybody had an idea of what kind of where it's going and what we intend to do here. I'll have to say I've never done this in this format, so it's all a big experiment. But what we're asking you to do is, if you're interested in participating in the workshop, that you would fill out one of these lovely cards here next to the participants arrow under the big number 1. It's just looking for you to bring in a single statement description some project that you're currently working on. If it's a design project, and whatever those words mean to you, we'd ask you to put a project statement here. And I use this quite a bit in trying to frame design projects in students about blank is a blank that blanks for blank. Like, what is the thing called, and what does it do, and for whom does it do it, and what is the context? And so I've given a little example there of what a design project card might look like. We don't need a lot of detail, I think, to do the workshop. If you're more in the research space, then we've also provided some research cards. In this case, the Mad Lib version of it is blank is a blank that blanks for blank, which is pretty similar. Actually, I should have adjusted this to sort of asks blank for blank. So what are the research questions you're after, and in what context? So if I could, I'm going to just pause for a few minutes and let people fill some of those out. While I'm talking, Christian will start to break them up into groups. And then after this brief talk about the book, we'll jump into how we're actually going to do this workshop. I should have mentioned, if you're just interested in watching, you could fill out a spectator card, but what fun would that be? But if you just have no projects to share, you just kind of want to participate, or you just want to watch and not join in, you can also fill out one of these cards. That way we'll know who's doing what.
Yeah. And has anyone had any issues with the Miro? I see that people are able to go in there. So let me know if anyone is having any issues there. And then I believe I see we just got 2 new people joining us. So we are doing a, I'm going to be dropping a Miro link for those of you that just joined, and basically we're going to be doing an activity here.
Okay, well, looks like cards are filling out, and while that's happening, I'll just go ahead and get started here. So Thanks to Christian, and thanks again to the Chicago Graphic Design Club for inviting me back. Yeah, last time I was talking about some book that I was writing, or maybe I wrote it, I don't remember. It was 2 years, it's a wild 2 years, right? The book is out now. It came out in March, published by the MIT Press. It's called Design After Capitalism. I do have a number of different academic appointments that I hold at this point. I'm a professor in the School of Design at the University of Cincinnati. I'm also a PhD researcher in the transition design program at Carnegie Mellon University, and I'm an associate editor for the communication design journal Visible Language. All of those credentials are useful for publishing a book and all that good stuff, but I think the credentials that are probably more valuable in this context are the fact that I've been a practicing designer, or is the fact that I've been a practicing designer for over 20 years. I used to call myself a graphic designer, changed terms enough to I'm just a designer now, I guess. But that starting point has involved, working as a designer of various kinds in a pretty wide range of contexts. And so I started my career out working really squarely in the digital space and some kind of startup-y environments. Have worked in some studios and agencies, some of which were very large, some of which are very small. I've worked in and also run a design department in a nonprofit cultural institution. I worked as a freelancer. I eventually started my own business actually in Chicago in 2009. I continue to do both design work, commissioned research projects, and also increasingly consulting on issues related to strategic foresight, or some of the issues even related to this book, about thinking about how we kind of engage design in a broader social space of practice beyond dollars and cents. And as part of that, have also founded and directed a research lab, have coordinated a lot of research partnerships, including between academic institutions and businesses. So all that just to say that everything that I have to say here about the sort of economic aspects of design are from this inside point of view. And I like when I talk about this book to really make this point as strongly as I can. I like to start with this Matt Bohr's cartoon. I quite like the Mr. Gotcha series. And in this one, we see, the sad fella toiling under the yoke of feudalism, who's saying, we should improve society somewhat, and we have Mr. Gotcha popping out of the well. I always kind of picture Mr. Gotcha as like a timeless Twitter troll who pops up and says, aha, yet you participate in society, curious. And I start here to say that I'm a designer. I'm also a business owner. All of the critiques that I'm making here have to do with kind of an immanent critique, which means I am critiquing it from the inside. And it is also a systemic critique, which means that I don't think that I'm not pointing fingers at individuals or at businesses per se, but understanding that I think the discipline, broadly speaking, that we might call design, the professional fields of design, have lasted just long enough now to have moved into a different kind of political economy than they began in, and that we stand to reconsider how it is that these professional fields known as design intersect with things like politics, economy, society, et cetera. And so all of this is to say that there are paradoxes, there are contradictions, and yes, I'm right. I myself am right in the middle of all of these. What does this title mean? I mean, what is even this idea of design after capitalism? To me, it has a lot to do with, on the one hand, as I think I was saying in the book, that I have done a lot of projects that wanted to maybe transcend what felt like some of the limitations of design practice. I kept bumping into certain walls, or at least one wall, maybe I found out it was one wall, which had to do with a particular economic system. But I also have, I think, found over the last many years that increasing attention to design's role and potential for transformation inside other contemporary crises, like climate change or like social inequity, I think are also tied to its relationship to issues of political economy. That if we're to talk about design's both implications and responsibilities, but perhaps also its capacity for change inside issues like climate justice, racial justice, social justice, that we also have to think about how it participates also in another huge system that is concurrent with those other two as well. And so what I'm really after is a way that we might reorient, or at least sort of tug at the discipline to point it in a certain direction and to give a name to that, and to identify ways that in order to, after we've named that, how do we sort of move in that direction, means having to transcend something which we can identify and we can name. And so the term after capitalism has been around for a while in a number of fields, but trying to identify, this kind of like what that future political economy might look like, may be quite fuzzy, but that design has a way, I believe strongly, to participate in both bringing it about and maybe prefiguring some of what life would look like in that. In the book, I reference this book, I should say, by John Heskett. It was like a major source of inspiration. It's a major sort of source for my own research, my own book. It's Design and the Creation of Value, published by the British design historian John Heskett just after he passed away, actually. And it's the only book that I've come across in which someone has seriously taken up the question of where do design practices actually fit in economic theory? And I should say here specifically in kind of the Western canon of economic theory. And so Heskett does some heavy lifting for us by really looking at all the different economic theories put forth in this long history, going back essentially to Adam Smith and moving through Karl Marx into Keynesian ideas about economic theory through the Austrian school, neoliberalism, and kind of the revival of neoclassical economic ideas, and up into contemporary thinkers like Paul Romer, describing something like endogenous growth. And it's an amazing piece of scholarship for designers to witness, this kind of all of these maneuvers that Heskett takes through this history, and only to discover that design's presence as a force of economic value creation is almost invisible in all of them, that there's like really almost no way in which we can see in any of these economic theories that design can actually create economic value. And it's interesting because Heskett claims, and I would argue, I think we all witness, but we know it does. Like none of us would be employed if it weren't the case. We would not continue to find work doing this inside a capitalist system if there wasn't some value being created out of the work that designers do. So what Heskett has contributed to this history is his own theory, the value creation theory for design. And he identifies these three different models of innovation that design can create. He talks about process innovations, which may be about how things are produced and manufactured and how they sort of are put out into the world. Product innovations, what are the actual things or thingless or immaterial services that designers participate in creating. And transaction innovations, what are the ways in which people come into contact with or make exchanges with products, services, and enterprises. And I think this is great. I mean, this is exciting because we finally have, there's a lot more to it here, but we finally have a model that names and explicitly identifies how design creates value. For me, the problem is he ends up pointing all of these back to imperfect competition in the marketplace. Like that fundamentally, this is sort of the ceiling of design activities. And this is the point where I love that he created a model for us, but I feel like I have to depart to say it's clearly not the only function of design. And we also know that, I think, both from practice and also a history of alternative models. I also, just like to acknowledge that I think most people don't think about the economy. I mean, we may think a lot about money, and we may think a lot about business and exchanges and time and things like that, and the kinds of, the kind of economics of a certain scale of our daily lives or of our practices, our businesses, et cetera. But it's we're often probably too busy to think really much bigger than that. And I would say, designers are often in this category. I certainly was in this category for much of my career until I started thinking about the economy, and then I guess I couldn't stop. And when we think about like what that is, when we're talking about like the economy, this is also, I think, one of the illusions that I'm trying to help overcome for designers. And so I'm referencing here a fairly well-known, fairly well-cited diagram or image by the feminist economic geographers who go under the pseudonym J.K. Gibson Graham, calling this the tip of the iceberg. And so what J.K. Gibson Graham are wanting us to identify is that every economy, no matter how, any national economy, any economy of any always is hybrid. It's a hybrid of various kinds of economies. And when we talk about a capitalist economy, we're talking about the tip of a really large iceberg, and there are a lot of other things that we maybe don't clearly recognize as part of what makes that economy function, that live below the waterline, as it were. And so it's sort of just revealing the dirty little secret here, which is like the economy does not exist. There are many, many different economies. They're always intersecting. The one that we maybe think about and talk about a lot when we talk about the one, if we're in an economy that appears to be dominantly capitalist, like in the United States, follows these basic features, which would be one works for a wage in a business. That business pays the wage of the employee in exchange for labor. That labor produces something. That something is sold on a market. It's sold for a profit. The person who takes that wage goes and buys all of the things that they need in their life from other businesses, right? So these are the fundamental definitions, I guess, of what comprises a capitalist economy. And one of the things that I'm trying to do is I think leverage some of this economic theory coming from a lot of different fields to say that maybe design could pay its attention more to the things that are happening below the waterline, because they're already there. And so it is not an argument of revolution. It's one of a kind of a slow erosion of our dependence, and maybe even our consideration of the dominance of this one model. As is probably evident already in some ways, yes, I wrote a book, but I also am more concerned about the ideas, and maybe even more so the application of the ideas in the book. So the book is, one version of these ideas, but have also put together this website, designaftercapitalism.org, which has a host of other tools to go along with it. I'm sort of hoping people will take it up as a way to expand their vocabulary, and in that way expand their thinking about what they're learning in design as students, what they're teaching in design as educators, but also how they're practicing design. So on the site, you can find things like, lecture videos that I've put out there. So if people want to teach the content that's available, recommended readings, a glossary of terms, which might help with some of the economic theory stuff, especially if you don't read the book and you just want to follow along some other way. Lots of case studies that are in the book, and I hope to continue to grow. And the thing that we're going to really spend some time with today, which are a series of practical guidelines, which operate at different scales, and that I'm hoping that people can bring into their everyday practice. So the idea that I'm trying to shift the orientation of design practices means, of course, it's not going to happen overnight, but I do think it's possible through a kind of sustained change in the kinds of questions we ask when we're in the act of kind of framing, scoping, and actually doing the work of designing products, services, and the kinds of things that we produce. And of course, there's a version written entirely in memes. So if that's your preferred reading method, you can enjoy SpongeBob and other other characters. The point of all of this being, trying to bring the ideas into a kind of a cultural space where they might be used. So one of the emphases here is also, I'll just admit, one of my own sort of slow recognition of how much the way in which the contemporary economy operates, or layers of economies operate, has really changed, in that capitalism is no longer an economy of things. And of course, things are still produced, and of course, things are still active, but the production of goods has actually, since the 1970s in this country, become subsidiary to the production of services, and increasingly data, information, digital services, digital products, and these kinds of things. And so it is this digital economy, which has been talked about and sort of and excited in both critical terms for a long time. But we are in a situation where data and platforms are some of the basic ingredients of a new economic form. And in particular, it has to do with the ways in which information and the sort of the control or the ownership of information presents an entire new terrain of economic power. I'm particularly inspired by and build on some of the work of Mackenzie Wark, who's on design faculty at Parsons, and has done some really interesting work on a hacker's manifesto, and also a newer book that's called Capital is Dead, essentially kind of a thought experiment, but also indicating that the class structure of society has shifted with the introduction of these digital platforms that are so economically and also then politically powerful in society. So what Wark draws our attention to is a new class, the Vectorial Class, which is not only big tech, but essentially those that control and basically set the ground rules for what is property, what can be owned, and how information can move around. They own and control the vectors of information, and this is very powerful. And this couples with a different class, a different new class, which is the hacker class, which I think most designers would find themselves in. And it's different than the working class of yesterday. It's also different from the capitalist class of factory owners and this kind of thing. It has the labor of the hacker class has very little relationship to time. It has to do with how quickly or how long it might take for one to hack out some new piece of value from existing forms of information, existing, packets of cultural information, et cetera. And so this is, I think, squarely the space that most designers find themselves in. And so it's maybe easy to say, but still, I think, not trivial to just point out that if capitalism is no longer an economy of things, so too is design no longer a discipline of things. And I think we are probably, most of us, very familiar with that and the kinds of things that we might, or the kinds of not things that we might be designing, the kind of immaterial experiences that we might be producing. What is a brand? What is an experience? What is ownership? What is property? I mean, all of these things are completely scrambled, inside an economy that's not about things, and inside a practice that started by, basically making differentiation through things. And so we're in an entirely new space. And while I think in many ways design has fared quite well economically, I think particularly in the space of UX design, we find ourselves in kind of like a new territory of practice that maybe thinks it doesn't have a history and maybe thinks it doesn't have a politics, but it certainly does. It just maybe has forgotten how it got there. I think case studies are always great. So there are a lot of case studies in the book, and some of the case studies I'm just going to share here have to do with largely contemporary practices that I don't necessarily think are like, this is post-capitalism, but all of them are showing new ways in which we might think about some of the ingredients that could make for a new kind of political economy in a very in a way that has design as a center point. So if we look at the ways in which the production of material goods has become post-industrialized, we see really fascinating practices like down in the bottom left, my friends Alice and Gavin Monroe, who have found ways to grow furniture in northern England. So no more industrial production, just ancient art of coppicing trees, and very slowly in 7 to 9 years producing something like a chair or a table. The space of biotextiles as a new way to think about how garments and other kinds of material goods might be produced. A studio in Detroit called Thing that not only is working with post-industrial and post-consumer ways and processes for manufacturing those into new kinds of goods. Again, all of these, anytime we see a new mode of production, I think we're at a site of potential change of a political economy. I think the space of auto-industrial production is also a place that's ripe for this, and we see designers of all kinds, I think, getting increasingly involved in the space. At the top, we're looking at Adam Boyer, and one of his researchers, who has been for some decades now after this idea that the 20th century mathematician John von Neumann put out there about self-replicating machines, and getting closer and closer. Of course, 3D printing and 3D printers have been commodified in various ways, but the fundamental idea here is that if we can produce machines that can produce themselves, then material production no longer has an aspect of human labor to it. And that may be fine and well if we didn't care about the planet burning up in the meantime, but that this kind of activity could also fit into an ecology of other projects like the Filabot we see at the bottom, which is about recycling post-consumer goods into the kinds of filaments that can be used inside the machine. Or Protoprint, which is a social enterprise in India, identifying that there are many people working as waste pickers. How do we find ways to recognize the value putting into an increasingly circular economy, and find ways to recognize that labor and to move them up also in their quality of lives that they're experiencing. And then there are things, platforms like Thingiverse, in which people can post, ecology of projects like this. Maybe more close to home for some of us in this less object-oriented design fields, I think, are the ways that we can see changing models of a cooperative economy coming out of various forms of the open source movement, Creative Commons, et cetera. And so we also see designers who maybe were of an information, communication, or UX bent, finding their ways into peer-to-peer, direct peer-to-peer infrastructure building. So I think there's a lot of interesting stuff going on around peer-to-peer service design, peer-to-peer urbanism. The Peer-to-Peer Foundation is out there to support a lot of these projects and share information and get things started. The DESIS network, which has connected a global network of design schools and community-based projects, I think is another kind of inspiration in this direction. And increasingly finding that, maybe big tech or just technology development doesn't have to happen with big privately owned or publicly traded companies. So CoTech is it's a confederation of worker-owned co-ops in the UK that are mostly very small worker-owned tech companies, but you can confederate and make much larger groupings of worker-owned conglomerations to do much bigger projects. And so I think in all of these, we see much more clearly the ways in which we can shift the kind of the economic calculus of how practice is done. So again, that's an exceedingly brief overview of a 350-page design theory book, but these are some of the ideas in there and some of the inspiration feeding some of these ideas. Near the end of the book, I frame it up with a set of 4 principles, which are about the ways in which design can build social empowerment, can build and maintain community economies, can enact degrowth, and can also help create new kinds of subjectivities, by which I mean getting out of the consumer, user, designer, client framework and thinking about designers active in different ways with people with whom they work. And it's also to identify that there are multiple layers or multiple levels, scales at which we're working every day. So we might every day be working on some number of projects, but we're also doing something to make or enact a certain kind of practice. And the decisions we make at the practice level may have a lot to do with the kind of economy that we're building or sustaining or eroding. And then we also are contributing to or participating in, perpetuating or shifting a discipline in the way that we share the work that we share, the language that we use, how we talk about what we're doing, how we share methods, and that kind of thing. So it's at the intersection of these 4 principles and these 3 layers that I've identified these 12 specific strategies, and within these 12 specific strategies have identified a pretty long list. I think it's 64 unique guidelines, and I'm today what to do next is trying to put these into practice in a wide range of contexts. And so this is a bit of what we're up to in this workshop, is to look at some of these guidelines and try to apply them to some of the projects that you guys are bringing to the workshop today. So that's the end of the book talk. I'm going to stop right there and indicate that I think we have the Miro link going over in the chat. Is that right, Christian?
Yeah, there's a Miro link in the chat there, and I see some people are in there moving around.
Great. So let me, if I could, I'll share again, and I'll just hop over to Miro, if that's okay. And actually, if you give me 1 second, now my dog is whining. Another dog problem. Hey. Okay, so how many people do we have here? Do we have enough to just do this together? Or should we should break out a little bit.
So we have 12 people total in the Zoom call, and in the Miro board, I believe we have like about 5.
So let's do this. Why don't we put a couple of people together, and looks like Elle's doubled up. So Elle's here as a spectator and a participant. I'm going to move Elle over here, and we'll move Christian. Are you here? And too, I'll put you over here.
Yeah.
So if you guys can see the board at all. So maybe we'll do this. Maybe we don't need a breakout room, but maybe we could just open this up to discussion. And if it doesn't work, we can start to break out. Does that sound okay, Christian?
Yeah, I think that might be best at this point, just trying to do it that way, yeah.
Okay, so here's what I want to do, guys. This is what we had in mind. And again, it's an exceedingly brief amount of time. So maybe we just get started today and we can leave this open. But again, what this workshop is trying to plug into is this set of guidelines that are out on the website that you can access anytime. So What I was hoping that we might do, though, is to take a look at some of these project cards, provide a card here, and Christian has one, and Christian's is shorter, so I'm just gonna read that one first, and then we'll sort of look at how we're gonna use this. So Christian's project statement says, oh, it's a practice. Let me with the project. So L says, the Equity Graduate Employability Project is a service-driven approach to university curriculum and support that uses a strengths-based approach to employability, skill development for students with diverse capabilities and social capital so they may achieve meaningful career outcomes. Okay, it's a mouthful, and I think I kind of get it. But what we want to do is then I put way over here in section 3, I have this host of project guidelines. And this was my kind of like my closest Miro approximation to like drawing a card. And so each of these shapes over here represents one of the cards that you might draw. They are color coded. All of these are at the project level of these guidelines. So if it's about building social power, building and sustaining community economies, enacting degrowth, constructing post-capitalist subjectivities, we find, you know, those color coded options. And so under the project level, we have whatever number that is, like 30-ish cards. So we're gonna pick one. I guess L should pick one. Where's L? Are you here? Are you in? Yeah.
Yep. I think you're muted, Al. Might have to.
I don't see a pointer.
Yep. Yep. So looking at the project and the social power is standing out.
All right.
So what do I do?
So click on one of these numbers, and you'll get it'll say, I'm going to click on one of them because then people will see it. Okay, so, all right, so this is, so it takes you to a link, and the links are all on the Design After Capitalism site. And this one says, how about we support economically disadvantaged communities using some costs for education of necessary skills, e.g. programming development. So the idea of this, the whole idea of this particular prompt, and I'm gonna take it over here and drag it in here, is just to think about when we're doing all of the other things that we're doing on this project. And I wanna, I guess, stress that the emphasis on this, the emphasis on these, how they're phrased as how might we questions, and the emphasis is you're doing the work that you're doing. How might these questions add on to that to, you know, gradually expand the purview or expand the scope or expand the brief of what you're doing? And of course, there are many of these cards, but you could probably randomly draw another one. But the emphasis is to ask this question over and over again and think about how we might do this. And if we don't have too many people to just sort of talk through this with Elle's example, maybe we just do that, and then we could draw another card, or we could look at someone else's project. So in this particular prompt, I think, you know, what I was thinking about would be, you know, when we're thinking about how we're going to maybe at the level of implementing a project, we're going to need some level of, you know, perhaps we're going to need some fabrication, we're going to need some web development, we're going to need, you know, some forms of labor that are going to go into this. Can we actually use it as an opportunity to upskill local communities to do this work, rather than, you know, the inverse, which happens very, very quickly, which is a race to the bottom in outsourcing the work as cheaply and far away as sometimes as possible. So I wonder if there are aspects of your project, Al, that might require some, and I want to be careful about, you know, thinking about like what is labor, what kind of labor, but just the idea that there might be an opportunity to upskill some folks in the process of implementing this project. What do you think?
Yeah, it's even just reading that out, might we? It's really flipping the concept. A very tiny thing about the project, graduate employability from a university angle is always about the individual. That's about this graduate came through, did they get a job? The fact that this is now looking at community as an outcome rather than the individual, just coming to terms with that. That's a big one. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So yes, this clients.
Might also think about, you know, graduate employability. I mean, I also have to imagine that there are, I mean, I work in a large public university. There are a lot of people that work there in a lot of capacities that are not directly related to education, you know. And so I wonder if there's some, you know, are there sort of like upskilling, you know, for the, you know, I'll call it various administrative implementation, I should not be typing. You should what are the other kinds of things that are going to be happening, and what kind of upskilling might be possible? And so the emphasis here might be like, rather than thinking about a line item being spent for like, we're going to outsource this to the lowest bidder out there. Maybe some of that is an investment in yours is already in the education space. Maybe it's like, maybe it's easy, but sort of thinking about like how you might turn that into an investment, and sort of the maintenance of an investment in, creating, upward mobility, through education related to whatever the particular project might be.
Thank you. Yes, amazing.
What do we think? How do we do this? We keep going? Does anybody else have a card in here that's, I can do Christians. Oh, Brian. Brian, do you want to tell us about your project?
Sure. It's basically I work at an association. This is an ongoing publication, and we've been recently gone through major redesigns, and we're still kind of restructuring and how we're doing all our, how we're outreaching to people in our association and our audience. And there's a lot of change going on right now, whether it's in the type of media or just how we outreach to people, and we're just kind of redefining things as we go pretty much right now.
Great. Do you want to pick a different card?
Sure.
All right. I'm gonna drag your pink card over here to group 2.
Okay.
So our it's, I feel like a game show host now. Our categories, our categories are, I want to create social power in my project. I want to build and sustain community economies. I want to enact degrowth, or I want to construct post-capitalist subjectivities in my project.
Let's see. I think how I determine when the constituent community, not just the client or user, actually needs socially and materially. So I need to just like copy this?
Yeah, post it or paste it in the number 2.
Okay. Copy. And how do you get out of the screen? I'll just. Oh. You may want to paste that in. I've just lost the screen.
Which one did you click on? I didn't see.
It was the I want to build and sustain community and economies in my project. I think it was the first one.
Okay. Yeah, so that one says, how might we determine what the constituent community? So this is I'll say this comes strongly from the work of J.K. Gibson Graham, and what J.K. Gibson Graham have argued about the making of community economies is to think about that in a system that imagines that dollars and cents are what makes everything function, or also defines lack, that we tend to look at and in various, and when I say we, like inside, outside, across, whatever, that communities that seem to be without money, that's what they're lacking. That money would somehow fix the problems. And what J.K. Gibson Graham have demonstrated are various ways in which we can really look at the assets that are there that are often overlooked because we're so focused on identifying what's missing. And so I think what this particular prompt is wanting us to think about is like, how can we find out what, whoever we might be working for, like, what do they actually need? Are there other things that they might actually need that go beyond what the project was about? And I don't know what this means in the case of publishing, if the constituent community might be, the scientists themselves, if it's scientists who are reading this, or if is it who reads the magazine?
It's kind of a combination of people that work in the science of food and researchers, people that work in the food industry, food safety, really across the board.
Yeah. So I mean, if that sounds like a pretty broad range of job types and individual tasks and things like that, skills, different kinds of labor. I wonder if there are ways in which, so if there is a community that exists around that that publication. I wonder if there are ways in which there are, maybe identified or unidentified needs, but also unidentified assets that could be exchanged inside that community. I'm talking about food scientists and food producers and food workers. I mean, we just found out in the last couple of years that people that serve food are essential workers in this economy. And yet, I don't know, we love it all that well. So what this wants to ask us is like, I'm also thinking about the fact that when we study, when we're tasked or are hired to study a situation, we're going in with a very specific lens, which is like, somebody is here to expand or grow or do something with their enterprise. And we tend, if we're doing, user-centered research or whatever we're doing, we tend to learn a whole lot more than that. And what can we do with that? Can we take the more that we learn about this community and find ways to connect dots that might not have been seen before and might have nothing to do even with what the client was after in the first place? And where do we put that?
Well, in a lot of ways that really does apply, because really our mission is, really discovering what do our members need and, what supports their career, whether it's their starting career development or just their job path in the industry and things like that. So that really does make sense.
Okay, I hope it's helpful. It's hard. It's very abstract to me because it's a space I don't know anything about. But if I think about I think I'm hearing something like from food science to food service or the other way around. It seems like there's a lot of space for exchanges that might go well beyond, reading together, but that could be a beautiful starting point.
That's kind of something we're kind of working toward right now. We did create a community for our members, and a lot of them do help answer their own questions or interact with other people, and then we try to introduce questions with them to maybe bring up topics that they can discuss amongst themselves that we can also bring to the publication as well to have an open discussion.
Great. I heard you say something which is great, which is like, now that we have a community, like you've built this publication and it has galvanized a community that sounds like it's fairly diverse. And so now I wonder if it's possible that some aspect of this publication, if I'm understanding it as a publication correctly, can it start to really actively do that work, like directly connecting, assets and needs inside the work that it already does?
That's kind of something that that it actually has started to do on a certain level. We're also actively trying to provide that almost as a service too, where people could come and ask questions, and other people that work or are associated with the organization can help answer those questions, and we can direct them to the other people to help them out with whatever issue or trouble that they're having, basically.
Cool. I don't know. I hope this is helping. I don't know if this is boring to watch either. We were going to do some breakout rooms, but there's not quite enough cards on the table, I guess, as it were. Anything? Is there anything else you want to share, Brian, or anything else? Any other questions you have, or anything else we can maybe try to filter through this "how might we" question? Because I feel like it's one you could. Again, it's like this is just one snippet, one quick blast here, but I think you could probably dwell on this question for a while, since it seems like it might be relevant to what you're already doing.
Yeah, you pretty much can. I'd say that this does give me a little bit of a filter to, bring to how I look at the stuff that I work on a daily basis, and to help, maybe direct what suggestions I make to help shepherd the content and things as we produce it, basically. That definitely does create a pretty good lens to kind of consider that.
Cool. Okay, that helps. Should we bump over to group 3? I see Kevin has posted a research project, a research statement. You want to tell us about that, Kevin?
I don't even know if it qualifies as research in terms of what you were looking for. I'm still just trying to figure out how do I smash this concept into this pattern of a sentence. So I'm just trying to think how can I contribute to this? And I don't know. Maybe I can, maybe I can't. I'm basically full-time faculty in the graphic design program at Washtenaw Community College. in Ann Arbor here. So I spend most of my time basically just making entry-level graphic design courses. And my main area of focus is the history of graphic design. That's like the course that I spend the most time thinking about, the most time researching, that sort of thing. So anyhow, I don't know, like, is there a place for that, somewhere on this board?
Maybe. Let's find out. Also, you have there's an expert here. I saw Aggie's here. You want to say something about graphic design history? If Aggie's there. Let's see. So Kevin, I don't know. I'll say I'm not sure if this will work or not, but let's give it a go, right? So I'm going to probably go in maybe the bottom category here, the yellow category, about post-capitalist subjectivities. And the reason I'm going there is it's like, I think maybe there's something in there. Yeah, I mean, this is one of them. Maybe this is not the best one because it's kind of the most like a standard here, but it's like what this is trying to get at is like, how do we start to think about, how do we get out of this mindset? I mean, I think there are many things that user-centered design has done that have helped sort of narrow the focus of design, get really deeply into the lived everyday context of humans. At the same time, it has so emphasized individuality and individualism that it has eroded, I think, many other things like community, citizenship, etc. And so part of what, I mean, this is like, it's not that the book is on the whole focused entirely on this, but this is a big part of it, which is like, how do we shift our sense of like how we're working as designers? Who are we working for? And in what scales and ways are we working for them? So, I mean, I'm not sure this is like the best one for yours, but let's just click on the next one, see what we get. But I think somewhere in here we might find something useful. I mean, this one's about decentering competition. I mean, how about that? Fairly abstract, but it says something about how do we change the process of how we conceptualize value. And so if we put that in here, how might we prioritize communal processes of making, defining, and distributing value? So I'm a design educator. Sometimes I also teach design history courses. And I mean, one way I might read that is like in the classroom, how do we change that? Like, and this is to question like, what is the function? What is the value, or what is the value of design history for your students, and of what kind, and in what ways, right? And I think if we ask that, we can ask that in really, really broad terms, but we can also ask that really specifically. And we'll bump into, probably undergraduate design students like, I don't know, like I came here so you could tell me, I really don't know. We can also find, I think, analogous ways to ask those kinds of questions, like, well, how does understanding history help anybody do anything, right? How does it help them understand like where they have come from, or where some aspect of who they are has come from? And then I think, of course, you could turn that question on like, why is anything I'm talking about in this lecture valuable, or why is it valued, and how do we come to an understanding of, is it valued, or how do we talk about whether it is valued? And there's Aggie, raise her hand. Thank you.
Yeah, sorry, I didn't mean to leave you hanging there a second ago. I'm multitasking right now, but I love this question as it might apply to teaching design history, because especially at the undergraduate level right now, there's so much excitement around getting design students to do the primary work of writing history. And that might be a way to prioritize communal processes of making, is if your class is actually tasked with object analysis or text analysis and responsible for actually shaping the histories that they want to know about. I feel like the Cornish School up in Seattle does a great job with that. Natalia Ilian's class does a great job with that. I think I've seen little projects all over, like NC State does it. I've seen Ian Lynham do it with his students in Japan. Just students actively writing history, and when they're in that role, then they have then they start to assess the way histories have been written in the past, and a lot of design histories are still very hero-centric. And frankly, a narrative of a universalist narrative of capital. So by asking students to think about even the way histories are shaped, in order to shed light on communal processes of making, defining, and distributing value is like, that would be just like, could potentially revolutionary. Sorry.
No, that's good. Thank you.
Yeah, that's a great answer. Thank you, Aggie.
That's great. Thanks, Aggie. So again, these are all here, and we're kind of randomly picking some. Maybe we'll do one more round, because I noticed that Christian put his comment here, and but it has to do with the practice. And so I'm gonna actually move it down. It's great. Thank you, Christian. We can move this down. I didn't think we'd probably go through like rounds of this in this workshop, but if you scroll down, obviously you'll see that as you go layers down, it's like beyond asking these how might we questions about a project, we can also ask those about the kind of practice that we're building, or the kind of practice that we're already participating in. And I make the argument probably over and over and over again in the book that I believe that design practice is its own kind of institution making. I have been in a position as a designer, whether I'm an inside employee of that organization that I'm designing for or with, or working for or with, or as an outside consultant, that I have directed massive flows of money and labor and materials and intelligence and research and technological development. And so I don't do it of my own volition entirely, but I also I've made a lot of choices. And so I think that's what this is trying to acknowledge, that in many ways that it is how we operate our practice that moves up to the next level of the kind of political economy we're participating in. So enough about that. I'm going to scroll back over here and then move us down a little bit on the board. And by the way, I put the glossary link is up here. So if some words come up in the cards that aren't clear because they were in the book, you can click on the glossary. And so Christian, you're building a new practice. Want to tell us about it? Or someone's building a new practice?
Yeah, so for the past couple of years now, I've been working on this design studio, and it's a passion project, so I don't dedicate as much time to it as I'd like to. But one of the objectives is to offer like just professional quality like services to nonprofits that typically can't afford, quality graphic design, because to me, that's something that I always notice, is that you get, the really big corporations have like impeccable graphic design. And then typically smaller organizations, their graphic design is not so, they're just the execution of the stuff isn't as good. So, and I just feel like there's a lot of like just injustice there in the fact that, if you can't afford it, then you sort of have to suffer with the consequences. So that's pretty much it. So,
Okay.
So this.
How do you also not devalue, your own effort in this process, I think, or anyone else, that you work with is probably part of it. So if you were to pick a category here, if it's about social power, if it's about community economy, degrowth, subjectivity, which one sounds interesting?
I would say the blue, so social power.
Okay. Pick a number between 1 and 5.
2.
2. All right, good. How might we build a socially empowered organizational network of constituents, collaborators? Oh my gosh, beautiful question. All right, look at this. Okay, so let's take this over here. So, okay, it's a little wordy here, but I think this is really like what you're after, right? Like how is it that this organization is networked in a way? And this is where, I kind of hound on this in the book, like getting out of is this idea of subjectivity, like getting out of this language of users and consumers. I think particularly when we jump from like the language of users to consumers, which as design has become far more integrated and diffuse in healthcare, I find this to be particularly a problem. Mm-hmm. That like, how does anybody in any sort of any which way in which we're working them become a constituent of our work, whether we are producing things that are to be used by them or that they are some part of the enterprise? How do we start to see them as constituents, collaborators, contributors in some way? And so I think that I guess I would ask for you, like, if you're doing this work, I sit in a position as a faculty where, and I play this role in my communication design faculty of like, when people come asking for, hey, I got a project, it'd be great for the students. I'm probably for good reason. I'm the one that's like, there to make sure they're not just ripping off the students or trying to get free labor, and,
Yeah.
and try to like find some way to help educate them on like what we're doing as an institution of education and what design is as a practice, and find different models for them to work that are mutually beneficial. So I wonder if there's something in here that's also about that allows, I mean, is it possible that doing the thing you just described also maybe shifts the center point of expertise on graphic design a little bit out of only your hands into some of theirs, or into some of their other collaborators, or I don't know, other people in a network, in a way that doesn't devalue them?
Yeah, I agree. And I think maybe like a big principle to this is just like the various obvious fact of designing with, as opposed to strictly just designing for.
Yeah, I mean, do you have particular client types in mind? Are we talking about very large nonprofits who do have resources that are bound in a lot of ways?
Like very small.
Okay.
Yeah.
I mean, I guess the having knowing something about that world also, there's also the fact that people in that world do so many things. I mean, everyone's doing everything, and also within the tight regulations of operating a nonprofit for tax exempt status and things like that. So I wonder if that doesn't create this kind of opportunity where your role is, I mean, you still bring a layer of expertise and rigor and that kind of thing, but can you offset some of that in a way that puts it more in their control, or maybe bringing other people into the mix that don't have to be full-time design employees to get the work done, but if you're sitting in kind of the middle space between a senior practitioner or an educator and then working with clients like this, is there a sharing of that expertise that allows things to happen that doesn't devalue anybody in the process?
Yeah, because one of the issues that I've run into in the past is the fact that typically the small organizations, they move so fast that there almost isn't that space or that container to really educate them on the value of design, because they almost want everything to just be executed so rapidly. And there's not really that opportunity for like discussion or back and forth conversation. It's usually like, we need this by yesterday, and that's it.
I wonder if they need less design also.
Yeah.
Sometimes I wonder if some of the expediency and the rush is also because there's just too many pieces. There are, of course, all kinds of regulations in the nonprofit space about reporting and things like that, but at the same time, and of course the constant need for fundraising, but sometimes when you just say too many things, people stop listening. And that might be sort of like a lesson in designing away or designing less in order to increase the value of what you do design or what you do produce and the messages you put out there.
Yeah, because there was one instance where I actually had to cut my relationship with that client because they wanted us to design something in a way that just wasn't scalable. So they weren't really thinking about the longevity of what they were asking for. Like, they just wanted something now. And like, to us, like, it just didn't make sense. Like, you want us to design something that literally in 1 month is going to be completely useless. Why not do it this way so that you could continue iterating for months to come?
Yeah.
And there's tension there, and we just had to go our separate ways. And it was unfortunate because I really believe in what they're doing, but I just couldn't bring myself to do something that just was very backwards and just didn't make a lot of sense.
But then again, they might find out the hard way, and you're playing the long game, and it may come back around, right? I mean, if the the vision was correct. Yeah, I mean, had been there in a few ways around, particularly working with nonprofit organizations, and just it's like I cannot commit to this for a variety of reasons, and it's not because of the money, it's because the kind of like the vision is not there for like what we're actually doing, and so it's just not. It's going to end up dissatisfying all of us. Difficult to make that move. Well, I realized we went a little over time already. This was not at all not at all how we intended this to go, but I hope it was of some kind of value just to get like a glance at what some of these guidelines look like. We just dipped our toe into the practice level. We barely dipped our toe into the project level. There's also a disciplinary level. And that has to do with thinking about how you might participate in the kind of discourse, the kind of sharing of case studies and things like that when doing these kinds of things that might, identify that a shifted orientation of design might be possible. Again, promoting ideas, not a book here, but if go back to the website, I mean, this is the kind of organization of these things. I just kind of pulled this stuff off to put it onto Miro board for today. But looking at these strategies at the project level, you can then click into any one of these things and get a full list of the how might we questions. And again, I haven't, this is like, having been a practitioner, having done this whole like going through the theory bit of it and then coming back and trying to make something that's of practical value. That's how I got here. These things have not been widely road tested. So I would very much welcome anybody who tries these things out and finds them to be valuable to let me know. Maybe better if you try them out and they're not valuable, let me know and we can edit these or make these better. But I mean, I would love nothing more than to see kind of particularly this space, this practice-oriented space of this website or just this conversation to grow with case studies of shifts in the way that a project is shaped, a practice is shaped, and a discipline might begin to transition. So thanks everybody so much for your time tonight. And I'm happy to stick around for some Q&A if anybody wants to, but I'll also let people get on with their evenings.
Yeah, thank you so much, Matt. This was great. And I could totally see this being a, just like a something that maybe we do, maybe the club does like a study group of the book, and maybe it's something that, because I would love to see how some of these cards play out in people's practices and almost get, have people report back and have that conversation there. And they also really remind me, I know you and I, like we've talked about Brian Eno in the past, but they remind me of his oblique strategies. It's like, you're stuck on something, you just go pick a card and there you go do that.
Yes.
I don't know if that was an inspiration for you, but
I mean, I believe there's a Brian Eno quote even in the book. So probably. That was a fun one to try to pass. I mean, the MIT press is like, we might need to get permission on that one. I'm like, I don't think so. I think it'll be fine. Exactly. Yeah, baby sunfire. All right. Well, thanks everybody. I mean, get happy to stick around, or you have probably contact information, and I'd be happy to come back and do it again and check in. I think the next book talk, I'm doing a conversation with a guy named Jorge Camacho, who's part of he has some kind of research fellowship with the Institute for the Future, and there's a speculative futures group in Milan, and we're doing a little conversation in a couple of weeks. So, the next stop on the on the tour, I guess, the tour from my bedroom.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, man. Thank you everyone for joining in and participating. This was great.
Cool. All right. Thanks everybody. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.